The night wind howled through the rickety wooden walls, making the cabin door creak with a long, eerie wail. Elias Boone, the man who had lived in quiet solitude for so many years, stood at the threshold, his heart pounding. He had waited all winter. The money had been sent, the letter of confirmation received. Today, the bride he had longed for was supposed to be here. But when the door burst open, all those months of hopeful anticipation froze into ice. From the wooden beam at the center of the dimly lit room, a body hung suspended, its shadow cast long across the floor. The simple wedding dress was torn to shreds, and her hair hung loose, hiding half of her face. Bare feet dangled in the flickering glow of an oil lamp that was nearly burned out. Elias froze. His hand let go of the cowboy hat without realizing it. His heart felt like it had stopped. That was the bride he had repaired every cabin wall for, the one he had carefully placed dried flowers for, hoping to welcome her. A strong gust of wind slipped through the door frame, making the figure sway slightly. Elias was about to collapse when something even more horrifying happened. Her eyelids fluttered and a faint moan escaped her throat like a breath of wind. She was not dead. Elias lunged forward, his hands trembling as they reached for the rope cinched tightly around the woman's neck. He whispered, "Dear God, what is happening here?" Elias Boone stood frozen beside the lifeless body hanging from the ceiling. His aging heart, once hardened by countless losses, now trembled like that of a young man. He had waited for this day, the day his bride would arrive to finally end the long years of loneliness inside his cold, desolate cabin. But fate had opened the door with a cruel and merciless blow. Elias was over 40. He had once served as a cavalryman and had seen far too much blood spilled on the battlefield. When the war ended, he came back with calloused hands, a body full of scars, and a soul hollowed out by grief. His young wife had died during a raid by native tribes. Not long after, their only son could not survive either. Since then, Elias had withdrawn from the world, avoiding the eyes of others with nothing but his horses and the endless afternoons for company. His world had shrunk to a patch of dry land and a worn-down cabin. But the years of solitude had finally pushed him to a decision. He sent all his savings to a broker in town, asking him to find a woman who wanted to start over with a poor rancher. The reply came, a letter promising a bride would arrive on the first spring stagecoach. From that moment on, Elias felt hope rekindled, a hope he thought he had buried long ago. He repaired every wooden wall in the cabin, swept away years of dust and ash, built a new dining table from pine wood, and even placed a few dried flowers on the windowsill, something he had not touched since the day his wife died. Every evening, he sat on the porch, waiting for the shadow of a stagecoach to appear, imagining the smile of the woman who would step down and call his name. And now in front of his eyes, that woman was hanging from a noose inside the very place he had prepared to welcome her. Elias clenched his teeth, his gray eyes burning bright in the darkness. He did not know who had done this, or why she had been brought here in such a state, but inside his chest, a fire had just ignited. He could not let her die on the wedding night that never even had a chance to begin. His calloused hands tightened around the handle of his hunting knife, and he stepped forward. Each heavy footstep echoed through the dark cabin, carrying him closer to the rope where life still hung barely by a thread. The knife trembled slightly in Elias's hand, its steel edge glinting as it caught the flicker of the dying oil lamp. He looked up at the wooden beam, where the woman's body still twitched gently in the throes of death. Each breath she took was as fragile as a strand of mist, ready to vanish at any moment. "Hold on, I will not let you die," Elias whispered, his voice rough and hoarse. He wrapped his arms around her body, feeling the weight collapse into him, then sliced the rope with a swift stroke. The thick cord groaned dryly before it snapped with a sharp pop. Her limp body fell against Elias's chest. He dropped to his knees, holding her close, as if letting go would cause her to disappear into the shadows. He laid her down on the wooden cot, his calloused hand awkwardly brushing tangled strands of hair from her pale face. Her lips were cracked, her skin ice cold, but her chest was still rising and falling. Elias quickly poured water from a jug, lifted her head, and trickled it carefully between her lips. The water spilled from the corners of her mouth, but then her throat moved, swallowing it down. Elias caught a sudden flicker. Her eyelids quivered and slowly opened. Beneath long lashes, her eyes, dark and clouded with pain, wavered as they tried to focus on him. A frail hand reached up, clutching his wrist weak, but refusing to let go. "Please save." The whisper was barely a breath, but it struck Elias like thunder. He nodded, squeezing her small hand in his. "You will live, I promise." Elias quickly tore strips from his old shirt and wrapped them around her neck where the rope had left deep crimson marks. He worked like a man possessed, every motion rough but precise. His eyes never left her face, and in his chest surged a strange feeling, something beyond duty, beyond pity. It was the fear of losing something more precious than his own life. The oil lamp flickered out, and darkness wrapped itself around the cabin. Elias sat there, still holding her hand. He listened to her strained breathing, felt his own heart pounding like war drums, and knew that his life had just changed forever. She was not just the bride they sent. She was a life he had pulled back from death's grip, and that would draw him into a story he had never dared to imagine. The oil lamp had gone out, leaving only the glowing embers in the fireplace, casting shadows over two silent souls. Elias Boone sat on the edge of the bed, his back hunched, his broadweather hand still clutching the frail hand of the woman beside him. He was afraid that if he let go, the fragile life before him would vanish like wind-blown smoke across the prairie. The woman let out a soft moan, and then her eyes slowly opened. Her gaze was lost, blurry, yet still fixed on Elias. He leaned in, his voice low and growly like stone dragged across stone. "You are safe now. I will not let anyone hurt you again." She blinked and tears rolled down her pale cheeks. Her lips trembled, pushing out a few broken words. "They want to kill you, too." Elias froze. For a moment, memories of the battlefield flooded his mind. Traps, ambushes, shadows waiting in silence. He looked deep into her eyes and saw not just fear, but a harsh truth he had not yet faced. He poured more water and patiently helped her drink it, one small sip at a time. Each swallow made her tremble, but life was slowly returning. Elias took another strip of cloth and wrapped it gently around her neck, covering the brutal red marks. From time to time, she whispered in her native tongue sounds Elias could not understand. But when her eyes met his, there was something beginning to form, a fragile trust, clear as a single thread connecting two distant souls. The night stretched on endlessly. Elias did not sleep. He just sat there, listening to every breath, every small movement. And in his heart, something unfamiliar began to rise. Not just pity, not just duty. It was something deeper, an invisible cord pulling him out of the heavy darkness he had lived under for so many years. The woman Clara, as he had faintly caught from one of her murmured words, was still alive. Thank the heavens, even if fate had brought her here, wrapped in tragedy. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door, whispering that dawn was near. Elias knew that the long years of solitude were over along with the storms that were about to break over his life. Thank you so much for being here. If this story reminded you of days gone by dusty evenings, the sound of hooves echoing in your heart, then subscribe to my channel. So each day we can sit together again and I will tell you another tale from the Wild West just as the sky began to lighten, still tinged with the ash-gray hue of night. The sound of hooves echoed across the prairie. At first it was sparse, then it grew louder, heavier, like the beating of war drums. Elias jolted upright, his hand instinctively reaching for the old rifle leaning against the fireplace. On the wooden cot, Clara stirred, her eyes wide with panic, her lips trembling. They are back. Elias stepped onto the porch. Before him, red dust rose in thick clouds. Out of the haze emerged a gang of armed men, around 10 in total, led by the same marriage broker Elias had once handed his money to. The man's face was twisted with fury, a sneer spreading across his lips like a wolf catching the scent of blood. "Well, howdy, Boone," he shouted, his voice raspy and cruel. "I promised you a bride, did I not? Well, now you have one. But too bad this whole cabin is about to become your grave." The gang burst into laughter, then raised their rifles, aiming straight at the old wooden house. The early morning light glinted off the gun barrels black, gleaming like the teeth of a predator. Elias took a deep breath. He knew this was no bluff. They had come to erase everything Clara's hanging, his death by gunfire and the whole story buried as just another accident. Inside the cabin, Clara struggled to sit up. Her hand trembled as she pointed toward the door. "Him," He is the one who tried to kill me. Elias turned, his gray eyes meeting hers, and in them he saw a desperate trust. He gave her a small nod. Then he stepped fully onto the porch, rifle raised, his voice low and hoarser, but echoing with resolve, "You will not touch her. If it is blood you want, take mine." That declaration lit the air like a spark to dry brush. The broker barked a command. Gunfire erupted, bullets slicing through the wind and slamming into the wooden walls. Elias fell, rolled across the porch, and fired back. His first shot knocked a rider off his horse, sending the beast into a screaming frenzy. Gunham smoke filled the air. The cabin shook under the hail of bullets. Inside, Clara pressed herself against the wall, her fingers gripping the bed sheet, eyes locked on the silhouette of the lone man fighting off a pack of wild beasts outside. The entire prairie held its breath, and Elias Boone knew this was the battle that would decide life or death. Not just for him, but for the woman he had pulled back from the noose just one night ago. Gunham smoke blanketed the dusty red yard in front of the cabin. Each bullet tore through the morning air, mingling with the shrill cries of horses and the shouts of men, creating a symphony of chaos. Elias Boone, his scarred back pressed low behind a rotting wooden barrier, fired his rifle with steady breath and deadly precision. One gunman barely poked his head out from behind a boulder before a bullet struck him square in the forehead. He collapsed backward, eyes still wide, staring at the sky as blood soaked into the dirt. Two others charged the front door, shouting and firing wildly. Elias stepped back, reloaded, then burst out from the side window, firing 2 clean shots. Both men dropped like sacks of grain. "Boone!" The broker roared, his voice cracking with rage. He crouched behind his saddle, eyes burning red with hate. "You think you can stand against me? You are nothing but a lonely old rancher. That girl will not save you." Elias let out a tired, bitter laugh. His voice cracked like stone, tumbling down a cliff as he shouted back, "At least I have something you never will, the courage to protect a life." Gunfire erupted again. A bullet tore through the brim of Elias's wide hat, leaving a scorched hole. He rolled, diving into a shallow trench. Heart pounding like thunder. In that instant, old battlefield memories came rushing back, days of gripping a rifle beside comrades, knowing what fear was, and how survival came only to the stubborn. From inside the cabin, Clara called out in a hoarse voice. "Elias, behind you." He turned just in time to see the broker charging forward, pistol aimed straight at his chest. In that moment, everything slowed. The sunlight slicing through the smoke, the cruel lines of his enemy's weathered face, the hiss of breath between clenched teeth. Elias squeezed the trigger. A thunderous crack shattered the air. 2 shots rang out nearly at once. Elias felt a searing pain rip across his side. But the broker suddenly froze, eyes wide in disbelief, then collapsed to the ground, blood soaking through his chest. The sneer on his lips faded into silence. The prairie fell still again, only the haze of gunpowder lingered, the ragged breaths of horses and Elias Boone standing tall, blood staining his shirt. The heavy rifle still gripped in his hands. Inside the cabin, Clara collapsed onto the bed, tears spilling like a broken dam. She knew he had not pulled the trigger just to save himself. He had fought to hold on to the fragile chance for both of them to live. The smoke began to clear, leaving behind the stinging scent of gunpowder hanging over the red, dirty yard. The bodies of the gunmen lay scattered around the cabin. Their horses had fled in a panic, the sound of hooves fading into the vast prairie. Elias stood motionless, his callous hands still gripping the rifle, his chest rising and falling. The wound at his side throbbed with pain, blood soaking through his shirt, but he was still standing, and he was still alive. Inside the cabin, Clara struggled to sit up. Her body trembled, but her eyes burned bright. When Elias stepped through the door, her lips quivered as she whispered, "You saved me. Again." Elias knelt beside her, setting the rifle down and placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "No one will ever touch you again, Clara. I swear it." His voice was, but the words rang out like an oath. Outside, new hoof beats echoed across the land. Elias jolted, lifting the rifle once more. But this time, it was not the enemy. It was neighbors from nearby ranches, drawn by the thunder of gunfire. Broad-shouldered men on horseback circled the clearing, rifles in hand. One of them dismounted, eyes scanning the wreckage in disbelief. "Boone, what the hell happened here?" Elias looked around. then pointed to the dead broker lying in a pool of blood. He set a trap, hung my bride to lure me into death. He wanted land. He wanted money. Now he has paid the price. The neighbor clicked his tongue, and shook his head. Whispers of missing women around town suddenly made sense. So those bastards were the ones behind it all, he muttered, then looked at Elias differently. No longer as a reclusive old rancher, but as a man who had stood up against evil. They helped Elias gather the bodies, collect the weapons, and stamp out the small fires still smoldering on the cabin roof. Clara was helped onto the porch. Her face was still pale, but her gaze was steady. For the first time, she stood in the daylight